the worst financial decision you've seen someone make? Story 1. A guy in my fraternity got $30K for an undisclosed reason. I'm guessing a family death or something, and he bet it all on the Yankees winning one game. They lost. Story 2. My awful aunt was the trustee for my grandparents' estate. When they passed, she decided to sell their house to a random realtor who put a leaflet on the door to the realtor, not with the realtor. It wasn't put on the market, and the aunt rejected a matching offer by me after I argued hard to actually list the house and have people bid on it. The realtor slapped a new coat of paint on it and sold it a couple of months later for literally $1 million more than she bought it for. Story 3. My brother's ex fell for a Craigslist scam. She found a motorcycle, and the guy needed money up front to pay bills before she even saw it. We told her, don't do it. It's a scam. She said she already sent $1,000. Of course, he was never available to show her the bike, and we found out from my brother after they broke up. She actually continued sending him money in hopes of getting the motorcycle. I think she was out $3,000 by the end. Story 4. A friend of mine who is very bad with money and his girlfriend bought some sort of water filtration system from a door-to-door salesman. He has to pay something like $300 a month for this filtration system. He was all stoked because it came with a free set of pots and pans. Fast forward a year, and his girlfriend has broken up with him, moved out of the house, and he's had to sell his home because he can't afford to live there. The water filtration system is now sitting in a storage unit where he still pays $300 a month for it because he's on a 2 or 3 year contract. Sorry, the details are fuzzy. We have great water quality in my area. Story 5. My supervisor took out a loan against their 401k to pay their rent because their credit card were maxed. 2 weeks later, they bought a brand new $60K Lincoln with basically nothing down because her daughter just had a baby and I need a bigger car for that. Story 6. A dude who owned a small convenience store in our town spent like $20,000 on fidget spinners. He was posting for like a year begging people to buy them, as he would lose his business and his marriage was falling apart due to it. Story 7. My former sister-in-law had a thriving medical practice. She got so stressed that she joined the Scientologist and started taking their classes. She opened up 5-6 credit cards without telling my brother, maxed the cards out with hundreds of thousands in cash withdrawals, and gave it to that cult. Story 8. A co-worker I used to have worked every second of overtime he could for several years to save up for a house. When he applied for the house loan, he based his mortgage payment on all of the overtime he had been working. I tried to tell him that wasn't a good idea, but he didn't want to hear it. He ended up divorced a few years later because his wife got tired of him always working. Story 9. My cousin spent $100 of her inheritance and took out a lien on her home to buy a second home in the mountains. Thing is, it was being pushed over by a mountain, and they thought they could fix it. I went and seen it, and every door jamb was crooked, and the doors wouldn't shut. They took me down into the basement, and they were trying to use I-beams to stop the mountain from pushing on the home. I was just like, what the are you doing? That won't solve anything. Fast forward 6 months, and they asked me for $50K to help, and I declined. Fast forward a year, and the home collapsed, and now they owe over $300K for a home that doesn't exist, and if they don't make the payments, they lose their other house too, because they used the original home as collateral and could not get insurance on the second home. Total money lost upwards of $700K. Story 10. Ran up credit card debt requiring bankruptcy. Once they were able to build credit again, 7 years later, they proceeded to run up a massive amount of debt again, but couldn't go bankrupt again, so they used debt consolidation. The debt didn't come from sudden expenses. They just needed to buy things to feel better. Story 11. Worked with a 50-year-old guy who looked like the end of a rhino and hated anyone not from England who sent $10K to his fiancée in Thailand had never met for a job, clothes and flight over. Oddly enough, her naked pics and promises of when she visited stopped once the money had been sent. Story 12. A guy I dated for a short time had been joining a MLM scheme selling insurances. I listened to his monologue and told him I had no money. He was furious and tried to sell insurance to our waiter at the restaurant. He failed again. I'm still laughing today. He was no good guy. Story 13. My brother and his wife were in massive debt, didn't work high-paying jobs, and could no longer afford their 2-bedroom apartment. While trying to pay off the debt, they moved back home into our parents' basement. A week before they moved in, they built a computer, and a year after that, they consciously decided to try to get pregnant, which they did while still living in the basement and knowing they haven't improved their financial state whatsoever. Story 14. Had a co-worker with 5 kids who could all go to USC for free once he has worked there for 15 years, even if he quit. He quit at 14, 5 years for a job that barely paid more than he made at USC, cost all 5 kids a free education at a top school since he couldn't wait 6 more months. Story 15. My maternal grandmother bought an 8-plex to avoid capital gains when she sold her large house. The apartment complex was in the red and needed a lot of repairs. She hired my father to do them and be on-site manager. The place started making money. My mom, divorced from my dad, was mad that my grandma bought it in the first place, then hired my dad, then was proved wrong because it was making money. My grandma was in her 90s and my mom pressured her for years, so my grandma finally sold it. That place is in a high market area and is now worth millions. My mom made a poor financial decision based on petty spite. Story 16, 21 years old, living in dad's basement, paycheck to paycheck, went to a reptile exhibit and brought home 2 exotic frogs and a snake because they didn't have enough money for a bearded dragon. Story 17, I knew someone who got a loan for their wedding, but decided to blow it all at a casino. Now, they have a loan for $20K to pay off and nothing to show for it. Story 18, knew someone who answered those scam emails thinking they would get rich. Last I heard, he lost around $50K, emptied out savings account, and maxed out credit cards, left in debt, and had to move back with ailing parents. Not close to them at all, but more like a friend of a friend's cousin. Just would not listen. Genuinely thought he was going to be a millionaire. They kept stringing him along until the bitter end. And then, biggest concern his friends had was him trying to milk his ailing parents for their last nickel and dime. Fortunately, he wised up and knew he'd been had. The last I heard of him was he had an hourly job somewhere and trying to get out of debt. When I was 19, I went to Miami with some friends on Cinco de Mayo. We got insanely drunk and went bar hopping across the city. The next morning I looked at my transactions and realized I'd spent over $1,000. Story 19, they won thousands of dollars and bought a new entertainment system instead of getting current on their mortgage. Foreclosed on later that year. The thing was, the area had recently become the new it area for young families, and housing prices had skyrocketed. They easily could have just sold the house, paid cash for a larger house 20 minutes up the road, and still had tens of thousands left over. Story 20, my roommate buys DoorDash almost every day. They'll maybe cook for themselves once or twice a week, but other than that, they order food in 5 to 6 times a week. I know how much they make, and I have not a clue how they can afford that. Story 21, a guy I worked with found out that check cashing places were offering $15,000 no-question-asked loans. The interest rates were insane. I begged him not to do it, but he impulsively went on a lunch break and got $15,000 in cash and deposited it in his bank account. This was 6 years ago. He is still struggling because of it. He lost his wife and kid because he drank every penny of it in a summer. He got eviction notices, and the stress was too much to the point where he had a psychotic break which lasted for months. He is pushing 40, lives alone, can't see his child, hasn't had in a few years, and is forgotten by most of his friends because he was delusional and hallucinating for months. Story 22, anyone enlisted in the military buying a Charger or Mustang at astronomical interest rates. That is predatory and should be illegal in all 50 states. Story 23, my dad had his own company, and someone told him it made financial sense that instead of paying himself wages, he should take out a loan from his company. He built up debt for 3 years while working full-time rather than paying himself. It had all sorts of bad tax effects. Like he was required to pay interest on this, which was then taxed as profit of the company. Then he paid himself again, paying income taxes. It took him about 10 years to get out of that hole. Then he needed to sell his house because it was too expensive, but the buyer got cold feet on the last day before the sale. Rather than having the buyer pay 10 of the price to get out of the sale, he gave him an extension without an end date. The buyer then took 2 years to think about whether he wanted the house. All the while, my parents needed to keep paying the mortgage and couldn't sell the house to anyone else because of the contract they had with that guy. Brought them close to bankruptcy. I've personally paid a couple of $100 a month to let them pay for the mortgage during that time. Story 24, I knew a guy who was terrible with money. Worked in a warehouse, but spent all his money on drugs and things for his controlling girlfriend. Then one day, he came to me to show me his brand new car, probably around 40 to 50K. He takes me for a ride and starts bragging about how he took his pay stub to like 10 of those cash advance places and get 10K worth of loans and had been living like a king. It was as if he thought he found some sort of life hack. To this day, I'm not sure if he just thought he wouldn't have to pay it back or what. A couple weeks later, I learned he wasn't paying attention while driving and rear-ended a bus going way over the speed limit and totaled the car. Train wreck of a guy. Story 25, buying a purebred puppy while on a low-wage job with the end of your contract in sight, while also being a single parent in a rented apartment. Yeah, within a year, she was on food stamps. Story 26, this older lady worked part-time in my kitchen. It was a fine dining, fast-paced environment. She would only work about 20 hours per week doing busy work, peeling vegetables, washing produce, etc., tasks I knew she could handle and wouldn't get overwhelmed. Unfortunately, her husband passed away, and she requested a few months off. I totally understood and said, take all the time you need. Let me know when you feel comfortable coming back to work, if at all. Take care, Barbara. 8 months later, she contacted me for a job. I was more than willing to have her back in my kitchen. I nonchalantly asked her how she was coping with her loss. She broke down in tears. She apparently got a $500,000 insurance payout from her husband's death. Within those months, she attempted to open a restaurant and sink every dime into the establishment. It went out of business in 6 months. She was now broke as an elderly lady having to go back to work. Story 27, someone at my work bought a brand new Audi RS3, around 70 to 80K euros. He got 40K from his grandma because she gave it to him for if she is about to die, a small fortune to buy a house maybe. But no, what he did was put another 30K from his own money to buy the car. The guy has no house and has no money left. Story 28, many decisions around new tattoos or dogs when they can't pay rent regularly. My aunt says the rich get richer and the poor get another dog. I find this to be true for some of my family. Story 29, there was that post yesterday on Registrald in Ethesha where somebody sold in 07 Hyundai Sonata for scrap, and then the next day asked the scrapyard to give him back the 1,300 custom floor mats he left in the car. That guy has to be making bad financial decisions left and right. Story 30, I won't name any names, but a good friend who literally had it all, the high-rise apartment and a house down the street with a pool, sauna, casita, Hummer, Corvettes, a successful business, and about $400,000 in Bitcoin, threw it all away over a murder for hire because him and his non-related to any of the above successes, but from something about 10 years earlier before I knew him got greedy and no longer wanted to split their financial gain with a third person. So yeah, hired someone on the dark web to carry out the crime across state lines, but communicated everything over text. All three men, me friend, his business partner, and guy they hired have been caught and convicted. One received life in prison, and my friend, his business partner, are up for the death penalty. Also, he was only 35 when he was originally arrested. Story 31, my ex-husband paid $2,500 for an online domain, never made a dime from it. Oh, he also paid some fly-by-night company $1,500 to help us try to improve our credit. Then there was the $7,000 to pay off his truck. He then traded it in for a different truck, and payment a month later when the truck he now owns started having mechanical issues. There are a ton of reasons he is my ex. Story 32, neighbors. The bread earner died. Her sister and her daughter were left with the place. They could not afford the payments. They would not sell. They let it go to foreclosure, even though it had about $120,000 equity in it. New owners came in, did very little cosmetic work, just a little paint, and fixed the fence. They sold it and made a $200K profit in about 6 months. Story 33, getting remarried. He was convinced the first wife was the problem. She was, in part, but so was he. Zero self-awareness. He's getting sent to the cleaners yet again. Story 34, friend spent $50K on Twitch donations because he went through a hard time and was looking for acceptance, really messed his finances up for a long time. Edit the money was all on credit cards. Story 35, I used to be a car sales guy, and I watched as someone traded in their 6-month-old $95,000 pickup truck for $70,000 just to buy the exact same $95,000 truck. Literally, it was the same truck. The only difference was that the new truck had a gun safe. I told the guy we could install a gun safe for $2,000. It would have been the exact same gun safe in the exact same place. Guy added an additional $20,000 in debt for a gun safe. But hey, I got to make a $95,000 sale. Story 36, so many MLMs, so many, and they never listen. It's like some kind of wall goes up, a coworker got fired, destroyed his marriage while trying to make it as some MLM stooge. To give you an idea how bad it was for long-distance cards to Hispanic countries in an era when cell phones were taking off and long-distance as a concept was evaporating. He lost tens of thousands. Story 37, I'm a vet tech, and in the last month I've seen 3 different owners sell their old dog because they couldn't afford the medical bills, and a week later come back with for Himalayan kittens they couldn't decide, so took all of them, down to 2, gave them away, and 10 weeks late on second set vaccines. 2 husky German Shepherd puppies. It was a great deal. The young man has no job, a new apartment, a dog he can't neuter, and 2 cats who he constantly walks in to say they have fleas, ask for home remedies, and leave again. New puppies have worms, and Dar wouldn't extend credit beyond the $500 already owed. Screamed that I was killing his dogs, and everyone wanted his pets to die. Also, the dog and 2 cats were abandoned with previous roommate. 2 puppies for themselves, 1 for her sister and 1 for her best friend. They look like bullies with skin allergies in their future. Got a boyfriend, and moved away, leaving the dogs with her very frail mother. They all looked at me like I should squeal in delight at kittens and puppies, instead of breaking my heart for their old pet. Updated September 27th, 23. Story 38 cheated on 7 years of back taxes, got like 20K in returns. Then they were surprised they got audited. Last I heard, they moved away to try and run from it a little. Story 39, when someone is struggling financially, they inevitably believe the solution is to get an auto loan. On a related note, anyone who buys a car for drive time. Story 40, military dude married a girl 3 months after starting to hook up. He thought she had a good job because she liked expensive things. Turns out it was daddy's money and cut her off when she married the dude. Dude went from kind of struggling to 70K in debt overnight. His wife wasn't massive and refused to change her spending habits. Story 41, got out of the U.S. Air Force with 19 years time in service to avoid getting a COVID shot. For those unaware, 20 years of service gets you a lifetime pension and healthcare benefits. Story 42, going broke, keeping up child support payments to a cheating ex for a child that is likely not his. He saved enough for a DNA test, bought a new iPhone instead. Will continue payments. Gore 18 years for a child he has never met, for a woman who never loved him. Story 43, know a guy who got into Bitcoin crazy early, like he bought a ton of shares for pennies, then Bitcoin exploded, and at its peak he basically had like hundreds of thousands just there. He decided he was going to wait cause it would only soar from there. It didn't. He still cashed out and made like 20K, but compared to what he could have gotten, he doesn't like to talk about it. Know a guy who moved to grow his company. He was doing really well, bought a house, and then shortly after decided to drop his old business and jump headfirst into a brand new one unrelated to anything he knew about. Financial ruin, owes a lot of dangerous people a lot of money, and is about to lose the house. One of the world's nicest guys, but he really is life up. Story 44, my sister's husband reached out to me on some investing advice to make some quick cash during the pandemic when they had access to some extra income on top of an inheritance lump sum they came into. Told him over and over that investing should not be looked at as some kind of get-rich-quick scheme, and that any avenue that had that sort of potential had a greater chance of causing you to lose it all. Instead, look at it as a way to gradually build wealth over time. Explicitly told him that the market is going to be volatile due to the pandemic, and no one having any clue what that would mean for the markets. Went over the basics and recommended a split of some Vanguard index funds, VTSX, VDIX. I also covered the concept of riding the ups and downs, and that by consistently investing you will buy at highs and lows, which will even out over the long run towards steady growth. Reminded him multiple times that you do not lose anything in the market until the second you sell, and the difference between taxes associated with long versus short-term capital gains. Most importantly, I made sure to remind him that this is a gamble and that there is always risk involved, and to never invest something you cannot afford to lose. What does he do? He dumps 35K, they're not wealthy at all, into the market, and then pulls it out 4 months later, the first time the market took a dive. My sister then gets pissed at me for telling him to do all of this. Story 45, when my parents split up, my father didn't want to leave the house. So my mother's attorney convinced him to guarantee to give my mother half the value of the house at that time whenever he sold it, and he could keep the rest. I still remember him telling me, housing prices only go up. It'll come out of this way ahead. Your mother's being foolish. This was 5 minutes before the big housing collapse of 2008. By the time he was finally forced to sell 5 years later, his share was worth about a nickel after having to give my mom half of what the house had been worth 5 years before. I think about this every time he complains about not having any money, which is basically every time he talks to me. Story 46, seen someone sell their house and take out a much bigger mortgage to buy a pub that had failed 4 times in 3 years. It failed and they couldn't sell. It bankrupted then and they lost everything. Story 47, one time I saved up 10K. I had a manic episode. I thought I ran a business. I do run a business, but I thought I ran a much bigger business. So I started hiring people by giving them $1,000 cash. I would just start telling them to follow me around, and I would have them do nice things for people. I spent 10K that day. Maybe the world is better for it, but it was a total waste of money. They still say they want to work for me again, and maybe someday my business will get big enough that I can pay people to just go around and be nice to people. I can dream. Story 48, my dad worked for the UN and built up quite a good pension while he worked there, a good 400K. He left the UN in his mid to late 50s. Instead of looking for new work after leaving, he decided to move back to Venezuela, his home country, and just relax for a while. During this sabbatical, his wife and her family talked my dad into putting almost his whole pension into a single stock with her stockbroker nephew. The stock was Venezuelan oil stocks. Maybe you have an idea how volatile the Venezuelan economy is and how high inflation is there. It's a bad situation. But still, my dad did the thing, and at first it was okay, but then it wasn't. Predictably, the nephew lost my dad's entire nest egg. The nephew ended up ghosting my dad and his wife. At this point, my dad tried to find new work, but because he was so close to retirement age, he couldn't find anything decent. So my dad, a PhD graduate who worked at a decently high level at the UN, ended up having to clean houses for money. Story 49, an intern at our local wild animal rescue, admitted she racked up $150K in student debt, getting a degree that pays well below min wage. Our interns get a 1 stipend, some food, and housing, no medical benefits. For what I understand, they'll have to do that for a couple of years, and then they might get a minute wage job at a zoo. Mostly they end up getting a master's degree to become teachers. Story 50, guy I knew convinced his girlfriend to invest 6 figures worth of Apple stock that Shed had for many, many years in a cryptocurrency right before it all crashed. No, they're not together anymore. Story 51, put a lot of money into a house in a state that's running out of water and breaking heat records every year. It was me. I should sell it before more people catch on and before the inevitable housing market crash, but I know I want. Second mistake. I'm sure there would be more. Story 52, me. Walking away from custom home I built for wife and I on mountainside, facing Pacific full unfiltered fulls views of ocean, 1 mile away, distress from the betrayal. Lost my job, lived off savings and depression. Story 53, I used to run heavy equipment in Virginia. I made $13.50 an hour. A guy on my crew was making $12.50 an hour. He purchased a 5-bedroom, 3-bath, 2,500 square feet home for $425K. He was the sole income for the household of 6 people. They talked him into an interest-only loan. 6 months later, the housing market crashed. He lost his job and lost the house. I tried to explain to him that an interest-only loan was a scam, and he didn't make enough to afford that house and 4 kids with a wife that didn't work. I felt bad the next time I saw him, and he was living in an RV on someone's property. Story 54, I once knew this former goth kid who was constantly worried about what other people thought of him. So much so that he left a good job where everyone respected him and invested a ton of his parents' money in to try and start his own company just so he'd get more attention. But instead of just starting his own company from scratch, he bought a bunch of distressed assets he didn't understand, and then they lost the rest of their value quickly. The topper is he didn't research his company's new name, and turns out he didn't even own his dumb idea. I don't want to say the name of the business in case anyone has heard of it, so they'll just call it X. Story 55, I work at a casino, so I constantly see the pathetic depths people will sink to, especially the high rollers who will just casually lose $10K in 15 minutes. It's insane to me, but they can at least probably afford it. It's the average income people who will continue to empty their bank accounts in hopes of digging themselves out of a deep hole, or the ones who don't know when to stop and lose everything they just won. Story 56, my grandmother's second husband, who I know as my grandpa, died. She spent nearly all $50K of his life insurance money on a South African scammer who promised her romance and more money than she gave. She refused to listen to family telling her to stop. She subverted efforts by her own bank to stop her frequent questionable money transfers. Eventually, my parents had to close her bank account to force her to stop blowing my grandfather's money. I will never not resent her ignorance, selfishness, and inability to listen to anyone but herself. Story 57, a family friend who is a Psalm took out a second mortgage on their family's home to start a LuLaRoe business. When it started failing, she decided to dig into her husband's retirement account. Story 58, I do my brother SGL taxes each year. She got a big raise a couple years ago, owed more in taxes. When she found out that her taxes were more after the raise, she said she was going to refuse any additional raises so she didn't have to pay more taxes. I tried to explain to her that the raise she received was so much more than her increase in taxes, but she still maintained that she wasn't working for the government to take her money to give lazy people handouts. My brother, her, are both Trumpers. All she could see is that her tax increase would end up going to government handouts. She'd rather give up money herself than have any money go to lazy people receiving government handouts. In case it needs to be said, lazy people government handouts are her wording, not mine. Story 59, me. I went to a for-profit art school. Also me, married someone from the same school. Thanks to not understanding the terms of the loans at 18, having grown up in poverty, we were pressured into private and federal and the terms of taking forbearance when the world was facing the housing bubble crash. We ended up with $500,000 in student loans. Story 60, buy an expensive car on credit and sacrifice their children's education just to look flashy and keep it up. Luckily, the children's other parent came through eventually, but geez. Story 61, guy worked for like 30 years at the company I was with and was set up with a great pension if he retired at a certain age, like probably $5K a month in pension, and he lives a relatively expensive lifestyle. COVID happened, and the government put out a notice saying there was potential that all federally regulated businesses, which we were part of, would need to get the vaccine to continue working. He overreacted right off the bat, and even though they didn't follow through with his policy, he still retired early, a huge reduction in pension. Could have been living comfortably for the rest of his life, but now he is looking for construction jobs in his 50s because he can't make ends meet anymore. Jumped the gun for absolutely nothing. He was planning on retiring in 2 years, but cut it short because he was mad about the vaccine. Story 62, former friend of mine, decided it was a great idea to invest their college fund into crypto and NFTs. We are not friends because I busted out laughing when I was informed of this stupid decision. They now have practically nothing to show for it. Story 63 had an unemployed friend inherit a boatload of money when her dad died. Instead of investing it and getting a job, she took it easy for 10 years. She was homeless, living in a van when the money ran out. Story 64, taking out a loan where the interest was like 13 monthly with no grace period for paying it back. Basically go to school and watch your loan increase monthly. BC, you don't have a career yet to pay off the loan. That idiot was my sister, and she duped my parents into co-signing. They had to refinance the house. BC, by her sophomore year, it was going up by like $2,000 a month. To boot, they can't afford to help pay for any other sibling. Story 65, a couple of years ago, my friend was visiting Vegas for a few weeks, and he lent out $170,000 to someone who was essentially a stranger, but my friend thought that he was a very rich stranger. My friend is not rich by any means, and was just on a hot streak while doing sports betting. He never saw that money again. The guy who he lent money to was actually broke, and does this type of stuff all the time. Story 66 had $800 in his bank total. Spent $784 on an Airbnb for a single night to throw a party for his birthday when the owner said no parties. Lied to management at his job to throw it. Got kicked out of the Airbnb in 30 minutes and fired from his job for lying. He was gas station clerk. Couldn't get a refund either. Bro, I'm so broke. Why does all this bad stuff always happen to me? Story 67 was taken to the casino by my family a few weeks after turning 18. More to celebrate than gamble. And up with my uncle after a few hours. He's had enough to drink at this point. He is somewhere between tipsy and drunk, and I've kind of been put in charge of him while the rest of the family catches up. We wander across to the roulette tables, and an event I will remember for the rest of my life happens. He drops chip on black 6, pays out almost $200. He decides to let it ride. I don't know a lot about roulette at this point in my life, but I know the odds are incredibly low of this happening again. Black 6 comes up again. There's about 6,000 now there. This is more money than I've seen in my life in one place. He's going to let it ride again. I try to convince him to take at least half and put it aside. 3,000 is a lot of money. Black 6 comes up a third time. 200,000 worth of chips is sitting on the table. I'm basically begging him to leave at this stage. I point out to the attendant running the game that he's had a few drinks and really shouldn't be gambling. But since he put the money there, he is the one who has to make the decision. I tell my uncle, who is taking winning $250,000 in stride with the coolness of someone who has been steadily drinking beers all night, if he doesn't care about losing the money, to give me half of what is there as a birthday present. All please fall to deaf ears, and Black 6 rides once more. Black 6 does not come up a fourth time, and enough money to buy a house disappears faster than it came. My uncle's demeanor is unchanged. He is as unperturbed at losing the money as he was winning it. Deeply shaken, I drag him off to find the rest of my family. I don't tell his wife about it, but tell my parents as we were driving back home. Well, that's Russell. My friend once bought a 200 to 300 tote bag, Marc Jacobs brand. I spent 2 hours talking him out of it just for him to buy it for his girlfriend. They got together 3 weeks prior roughly. He still bought it, and she broke up with him 2 weeks later. About 2 months later, they got back together and now are happy together. I still don't think he should have bought the bag. Story 68 TLDR. I needed $800. Ended up with a $3,500 loan. Now, I owe $10,000 my girlfriend at the time, and I didn't have time to run to the bank before work one day, but we had our rent money with us. It ended up getting stolen. So we went to apply for a loan the next day. We only needed $800, but I was approved for like $3,500. So of course, like idiots, we got the full $3,500. We ended up blowing through the remaining $2,700 and then running up my credit card to just over $13,000, as I was the only one working most of the time, and I didn't and still don't have a good paying job by any sense of the word. We ended up breaking up like 6 months after the fact, and due to the nature of the split, I didn't want a thing from her. I just wanted to forget she ever existed. So now I'm on the hook for over $13,000 and made payment arrangement for the card. I get paid weekly. The payment was supposed to come out on Tuesday, and I got paid on Thursday. It wasn't there on Tuesday, so the company immediately sent it to collections, and that just pissed me off. So like a reasonable adult I just refused to make the payment at all for over 2 years. Eventually the collections company found me, and now I'm paying them instead of doing what I should have done in the beginning. Story 69, my wife's mom and stepdad. They pay more than a mortgage on car payments. They live in a trailer. He had a Charger he paid $900 a month to lease. He was never going to own it, paid on it for like 2 years, and now he has a big old truck he's paying on. He won't use it to help us move because he doesn't want the bed to get scratched. Their entire life is what not to do with money. Rent a center, everything, constantly have the newest tech, and live in a double wide in a trailer park. I still can't believe it when I go there. It's actually a single, so not even a double wide.